Welcome back. Foreign investors have held back new investment plans as they wait for clarity on the economic front in Pakistan, since the current government is still mulling over options to fix the faltering economy. Well, according to the latest report by the State Bank of Pakistan, foreign direct investment dropped to 43% to $439.5 million in the first 3 months from July to September of the current fiscal year, compared to the $765.2 million in the same period last year. Well, conflicting reports on whether Pakistan would avail the International Monetary Fund bailout have confused foreign investors, as doubts remain whether Pakistan would again contact friendly countries to borrow funds or would exercise both the options, including taking the IMF bailout to avoid default on import payments and debt servicing, which has hampered fresh investment flow into Pakistan. This news comes as Prime Minister Imran Khan announced yesterday that he would visit Saudi Arabia, his second in less than 5 weeks, to seek financial aid with the aim of avoiding the International Monetary Fund, or at least negotiate with the fund from a position of strength. This news has further casted doubts in investors' mind, as no policy direction is currently available. Meanwhile, international rating agency Moody's has stated that the new IMF program for Pakistan would prove beneficial for the new government. In a report, Moody's have stated that the new program would provide much needed cushion to the economy, as it would aid exports and attract foreign direct investment into the country. The rating agency also called mini budget of PTI government good for the economy, stating that it was necessary as the new finance bill would assist in bringing expenditures and deficits down. Furthermore, according to Moody's, the new IMF program would also assist Pakistan in carrying out economic reforms and give it policy direction. It will be interesting to see now what course of action the PTI government takes, since Prime Minister Imran Khan is leaving for Saudi Arabia as the IMF bailout seems ever closer. To talk more on the current economic woes, we have our esteemed guest, economic analyst Hasaan Khawar. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Khawar.
Thank you, Aisha. It's a pleasure to be here on the show.
Well, let me begin by asking you, how do you assess the current economic situation of the country?
This is something that we have seen before. This is not the first IMF program. We have seen scores of IMF program in Pakistan's history. So this is not an unprecedented challenge. I think what is making it more difficult is the lack of clarity and consensus in terms of how we are going to address this problem. And as you rightly said in your introduction, that Prime Minister yesterday again talked about going to Saudi Arabia. And what I believe that the government should do is it should go to Saudi Arabia, it should go to China, it should go to other countries, but not as an alternative to IMF, but rather in addition to the support and help that we can get from IMF. I think it's already too late. We all know that we need IMF support to get out of this crisis, and it's time for the political government to accept that.
Well, Mr. Khawar, the State Bank of Pakistan has stated that FDI for this year is significantly low compared to last year. The Chinese investments too seem to have dried down. Is this because of the lack of policy direction from the new PTI government or the current macroeconomic situation facing the country?
So I would not put the entire blame on the current PTI government. If you look at FDI, our FDI share in foreign exchange inflows is already very low. Last year it was $3.5 billion. And if you look at the first quarter numbers that you are quoting, it has tremendously gone down. The reason for that, Aisha, is that the CPEC investment is slowing down, not because of the lack of clarity, but also because it was an election year. The investors were looking at the new government to come in and settle and then kind of make the decision. So that's the first factor. The second factor, of course, is the economic slowdown and the mess that we are in. So investors are looking at it very, very keenly in terms of what we are going to do. And the lack of clarity that you mentioned is also not helping. So what we need is a lack of clarity so that investors realize that although we are in a tough spot, we have a clear-cut plan to get out of it, and we have a roadmap to follow, and that's what is needed right now.
Well, Moody's have stated that IMF bailout would be good for the country. What is your opinion on this?
Absolutely. So anybody would think that IMF bailout at this point is good because of three reasons. The first is that we are in dire need of foreign exchange reserves to beef them up. We are in the need of about $8 to $9 billion immediately within this year, and IMF is expected to come as an immediate source of low-cost, reliable source of financing. So that is one. But also, once IMF gives Pakistan a letter of comfort, it will be easier for Pakistan to go to other donors and multilaterals, which will also fall in line, and ADB and World Bank and other donors are also going to provide funding. So that's the second reason. And the third reason is that investors believe and analysts believe that once IMF program is there, that's going to bring in the needed discipline to follow a structured economic policy that will give impetus to the decisions, hard decisions that need to be taken, and some of the adjustments that still need to be made in terms of increasing the interest rate or somewhat further depreciation or addressing the circular debt and so on and so forth.
Well, Prime Minister Imran Khan is leaving for Saudi Arabia again, as you know, and is expected to talk about a Saudi bailout. So do you think Saudi Arabia would grant Pakistan an economic package worth equivalent to that of IMF, or is Imran Khan hoping to go in for foreign investors as well as IMF? It's going to be a two-way street.
If you look at Saudi Arabia right now, it is already facing a crisis, a political crisis internationally, and Saudi Arabia is in need of some support. And Pakistan, you know, has been an old reliable friend for Saudis. So it is likely that Saudis can offer some help. But we need to be realistic in terms of what is on the table. So if we believe that we would get some oil supply on concessional terms, that is very much possible. But the impact is not going to be more than $1 to $2 billion. If we want Saudis to invest in our power plants, in our projects like Recodec, that's a longer term project. The money that they are going to commit is not going to come in immediately. And if we believe that Saudis are going to park some money in Pakistan Development Fund like they did a few years ago, that seems a little unlikely. I will not rule out that option, but that is unlikely. And even if all three things happen, that will still not be enough for Pakistan to avoid going to IMF at this stage.
All right, I'd also like to bring up a point. A lot of people state that Pakistan is unable to secure a good IMF deal because of US pressure on IMF to reveal more about the CPEC projects. Does this assertion hold true? Also, it implies that there is no transparency within the CPEC deal. So could you offer your insight into this?
So I would not want to use the word lack of transparency. I would say it was lack of disclosure. And what the IMF and State Office are pushing Pakistan for is to share details of Pakistan's loan agreements with China, so that IMF can assess the actual nature of our liabilities and in terms of what we owe to China. So up to that extent, I think it's a fair demand and Pakistan should share these agreements. Now the rest of it is politics. Some people believe that US is going to put harsh conditions on Pakistan's collaboration with China. If you look at Chinese Foreign Office statement, they have given us a word of caution that Pak-China relationship should not be suffered, but they do welcome IMF support for Pakistan. I believe that if Pakistan is well prepared, if Pakistan has good options on the table, that's not going to put a dent into Pak-China relations, or it's not going to affect CPEC. If you also look at the liabilities accruing to Pakistan because of CPEC, that's not a huge amount, at least not during the horizon of a possible IMF program. During the next 2 to 3 years, every year we are not likely to pay more than, let's say, $500 to $600 million to China every year on account of CPEC loans. And that's not really a huge amount that IMF should really be worried about.
Mr. Khawar, lastly, I'd like to get your opinion. Do you think this new government will be able to bring Pakistan back on track and secure a good deal for Pakistan?
I think what's missing so far is a clear plan of action in terms of how that's going to happen. And once we see that plan, maybe after a month, once we know how PTI government exactly is planning to achieve these goals, I think we'd be in a better position to see if this government is capable enough or likely to achieve these goals. But what this government should absolutely not do is to send out confusing signals and confusing communications which shows that government perhaps is not clear about which policy direction it's going to follow. And that's what it needs to avoid immediately.
All right, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Khawar. And once again, that was economic analyst Hasaan Khawar updating us and discussing Pakistan's economy in light of Prime Minister Imran Khan's announcement that he will be going to Saudi Arabia. And now let's move on to a quick break. We'll be back with more news.